guys remember, we are in this chapter which is dedicated to the Sphira of Chesed. And towards the end of the chapter, he delineates 8 manifestations of Chesed and the types of intentions that we should have when we're doing the different acts of Chesed based on the effect that they have on the spiritual realm. We've done 6, and we have 2 more. Hopefully we'll do 1 today and 1 tomorrow. Okay? So we're up to number 7 on page Nun Ches. So we're up to number 7. Shvis, the 7th form of Chesed is Achnasas Kala. And the author here is going to talk about the way in which being involved in the mitzvah of Achnasas Kala has to do with working on the rectification of the Sphiros, which fits into the general theme here of doing Chesed with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, doing Chesed with Hashem. So Shvis, the 7th, Achnasas Kala l'chuppah, escorting the Kala into the Chuppah. And this is referring to, in general, in the realm of the mitzvah itself, everything having to do with the preparations needed to bring about the point where the Kala is actually ready to go into the Chuppah, which would mean providing for her dowry, providing for her clothing, providing for her jewelry, providing for all of the other needs of the wedding, and food, and so forth and so on. All of that falls into the category of Achnasas Kala. But since the mitzvah of Achnasas Kala involves, of course, the Kala and the Chosan, the female and the male, we should already be thinking about how the ways in which so much of the relationship between the male and the female, the role of a man, the role of a woman, the dynamic of the relationship is used as imagery for explaining the dynamic between the spheros. So that Achnasas Kala, the chuppah, is a very important thing. We find even the Kadosh Baruch Hu performed the mitzvah of Achnasas Kala with Chava. The Gemara says, actually braided her hair so that she should appear attractive and pleasant before Adam in order to endear her to him under the chuppah. And he was actually the shoshvin, meaning the escort, who escorted them together to the chuppah. And he was the Mizad Kedushin. And he did it all. Yeah. It's and of course, this was the kind of the crowning pinnacle of creation. All of creation was created for the purpose of the pinnacle of creation, which was man. Man was then separated into male and female for the purpose of bringing them back together in union. And that was in the context of fulfilling the first mitzvah in the Torah, which is Puruvu, be fruitful and multiply. Right? So it all was leading up to that there should be a union between male and female, and that union, that yichud, that zivug that takes place between the male and the female should result in fruit, fullness, right? And multiplicity, bounty. And that's what we're talking about here. The 7th mitzvah of Achnasas Kala, the chuppah, is all for the purpose of creating or bringing about, catalyzing the union between the male and the female. Now, the female, the Kala, that corresponds to the sphere of Malchus. Kala, Malchus. And we said that Malchus is called Malchus because on the one hand it expresses the kingship of Hashem into the world, but it's also related to the word like kol. Kolel. And that's what the Kala is. Right? Kala is also from the word like kol or kalul, kalula. We use that frame for a Kala, the kalula. Why? Because it is the bringing together, it is the ingathering, it is the describing the dynamic by which the female receives the male. And therefore, she's the kala, she's the kula, she receives, and therefore corresponds to the malchus. The chosan, that's tiferes. That's the mashpia. The sphere of tiferes, therefore, is the masculine we've discussed, which is mashpia down through yesod, and yesod into malchus. So that yesod is like that ring that binds the two, the chosan and the kala, which she receives from him, right? And it encircles her. She becomes the content of that shefa coming from the chosan. So, in the same way, the doing things that are involved in catalyzing the union between the kala and the chosan in the spiritual realm correspond to bringing about a yichud between malchus and tiferes. A union between malchus and tiferes, on page Nunches. Ubezeh nichlolim kol tzarkei yichud, and including therefore in this, meaning in the mitzvah of achnasas kala to the chuppah, in this is included all what is necessary for the yichud. Right? The yichud. And therefore you see the reference to the coming together of the male and the female as husband and wife, making two as one, where the unity that results from the separation is actually a greater degree of unity than existed before the separation in a certain way. What am I getting at? Is, like I said before, God created. The pinnacle creation was mankind. Mankind was a male and female aspect, where the male and female component were separated, only to be reunited by Hashem. And Hashem escorted Chava, the Malchus, into the Chuppah in order to receive the Tiferes. The question is, if the purpose of Hashem was to unify the male and the female component, why separate in the first place? Initially, they were one. Do you have any greater unity than that? One being, which is simultaneously male and female, together, unified, as one harmonious whole. Yet Hashem separates them, male, female, Malchus from Tiferes, for the purpose of bringing them back together again. Al ken yazov ish zaviv imo, yedebek b'ishto. We spoke about that. A person shall leave the father and the mother and cleave to his wife. So why separate them that they should have to be unified again? Elwa, you see from here that something which is initially one, even if it has component parts, and even though it seems to have a very high degree of unity, of harmony, of yichud, still, if it can be separated and then reunified, the unification that's achieved after the separation is actually a higher degree of unity than existed before the separation. Why? Because if it's one without separation, that doesn't necessarily imply that it should naturally be one. It could be artificially and arbitrarily one. But if it's been separated and then can come back again, can be brought back together again, that actually shows that these two component parts are in fact very compatible and they lend themselves to be one. And in fact, if you think about the fact that Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, were originally one, but the sages say that they were like two beings side to side, and that God separated one of the sides of Adam, which was mankind, and made Chava, which is mistakenly translated by the Christians to mean that God took a rib from Adam's side, when it wasn't really the rib, it was the side. Atzela is a side. It happens also to be the word for a rib, but the reason why a rib is called Atzela is because it's in the side of the body. Atzela is really a side, like we find Tzela HaMishkan, the side of the Mishkan, because it had three sides, right? There's nothing about a bone there. There's nothing about a rib there. Atzela is a side. So what God really did was he took a side of Adam, the female side, and separated it from the male side. Initially they were side by side, or they might have been back to back. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu separated this being which was one, right? Which was in a certainly undeniably a very high degree of unity, separated them. But gave them, through separation, the possibility to recombine, face to face, eye to eye, nose to nose, ear to ear, mouth to mouth, body to body, as one, in a much greater degree of unity than existed when they were really one being, but separate parts of that one being. So the same thing is true regarding creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything. There is nothing other than Hashem. According to the Kabbalah, Hashem created the appearance of other things through Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum represents taking a scenario of Ein Sof, where there is utter, complete, unified existence of God everywhere, so much so that there's not even place that you can speak about everywhere, to the extent to which we can kind of conceive of there being nothing other than God, because that oneness is so great that it precludes the possibility of there being anything other than that God. God imposed upon itself some form of limitation through the principle which we call tzimtzum, that resulted in multiplicity in the worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, and throughout the worlds, all of the spheros, which are also forms of multiplicity, giving different dimensions, right? Chokhmah, Bina, Das, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus, so forth and so on, right? Mm-hmm. All for the purpose of what? Redirecting that multiplicity back into the oneness of God, which is really the purpose of creation, and the mandate of mankind in creation is to recognize God as the underlying force between all of this otherwise seeming multiplicity, and revert all of that back to the oneness of God. So just like this dynamic applies regarding the male and female, the Chosin and Kala, the same thing applies to Kadosh Baruch Hu and the Bria, God and creation. So that the unity of God before creation is arguably less a degree of unity, as utterly unified as it is, it's still arguably less of a degree of unity that is achieved after multiplicity. And if you can turn the world of seeming multiplicity and revert it back into, absolved back into the utter oneness of God, the resultant unity is actually going to be even greater than it was initially. Because initially there was no apparent multiplicity. After creation, there's apparent multiplicity, which nevertheless is reunified back into the underlying oneness of God, which has the result being a greater degree of unity insofar as it can unify all of that otherwise seemingly multiplicity. That's the Chosin and Kala, that's the Malchus and the Tiferes, that's the Kodesh Baruch Hu and the Bria, that's the male and the female, and God is like the Chosin to the Bria, which is the Kala. Okay? You think about an analogy of white light. You see light. Wow, that's amazing. Light is a truly beautiful, luminescent, impressive, astounding piece of energy, right? Look at it. It's just so pervasive and unified. Take the light, send it through a prism, it becomes refracted into the colors of the spectrum. Wow, that's beautiful. But where was that? Where were all of those colors? All you see is this, like, effervescent, maybe is not the right word, this prevalent effusion of white light and energy. In every single spot of it, you have all the different colors of the spectrum. But you can't perceive them. But you know they're there. How so? Through refraction. Which means that the refraction of the light actually gives you greater appreciation of its unity before you saw the refraction. As wonderful as it is when you contemplate, like I said, this kind of effusion of white light, which is so prevalent everywhere, and you realize that it actually contains within it all of the different colors of the spectrum in a most unified, harmonious way, that all of those colors actually create white. Take paint, purple, red, and yellow, and blue, and mix it all together. What color do you get? Black. But here you put the colors of the spectrum together, and you got this white light. So as impressive as the concept of light is before we recognize what it's made of, when you realize that it harmoniously, the product is actually in a harmonious balance of all of those component parts, it actually gives you a greater appreciation of what it is. And then you refract it back through a prism, and it becomes white again. White light, prism refracted, going through another prism, re-refracted, and back into the white light. Right? That's what's happening in the separation between mankind into male and female, which are then re-refracted back into one, where after the refraction, the unity is higher than there was before the differentiation. And the same thing with the Kadosh Baruch Hu in the world, the Borei and the Bria, the Chosan and the Kala, the male and the female. It was refracted through Tzimtzum. The unity of God was refracted through Tzimtzum. And the purpose of human beings is to serve as that other prism which re-refracts that diversity and turns it back into a deeper understanding, appreciation for the underlying oneness of God, right? Just as we do with fire by the white light. That's the purpose of the spheres as well. So that's the Chasam and Kala. It's bringing about this most highest degree of yichud possible, and that's what he means here. Ubezei nichlolim kol tzarkei yichud. In the mitzvah of Chasam and Kala, when you think about it in the terms that I'm trying to describe here, we find that there's included in the mitzvah of Chasam and Kala all of the needs that are necessary for the yichud. What is the yichud? It is the unification of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekhinah, all of the spheros together, the body and the soul, it's all there. And he adds, Shekol tfilos ve'ayichudim hem sod hachnasas kala lechuppah. And it turns out that in fact, all of the prayers on page Nun Ches, yeah. Shekol tfilos, all of the prayers, ve'yichudim, and the other types of venues through which we affect the unification of God's name, of God's presence. Hem sod hachnasas kala lechuppah. It's all connected to the mystery underlying bringing the kala to the chuppah. So what does that mean? We'll see here in a minute. The ikara, the main way of achieving this yichud, is besod tefillah, is through the mystery of prayer, mikama medregos zoach hazo, which are arranged in several levels, one after the other. What are they? Karbonos is the first one. Zmiros, that's talking about Psukei de Zimra, which is the second one. Tefillah miyushav, Sheba kriyat shema v'birkosea. Then the seated part of prayer, which involves, after Psukei de Zimra, the kriyat shema and the blessings of the Shema. V'chakach, and after those three segments, you've got Tefillah me'umad. You've got the standing silent prayer. That's 4. And then he talks here about Ushar tikunim haboim achareim, and all of the other tikunim that are present in the tefillah after those 4 sections. We'll go into this in a little more detail. According to this, what he's saying is that the yichud, which takes place through the unification of the chassan and the kala, where we said that the purpose of God's creating mankind, separating the male and female, was to bring them together for the purpose of being fruitful and multiply. That means you see from here the idea that yichud is about bringing shefa. Right? The union of male and female is about being fruitful and multiplying. That's shefa. So when you see the union of chassan and kala, you're talking about making a unification, a yichud, where the purpose is to bring about to bring about shefa, which is the result of the union between the male and the female, the chassan and the kala. He says here that takes place primarily through prayer. And he says that the prayer has how many parts? Here he says 4 and then others. I don't think he delineates at this point the other 3. But there is initially 4, which he delineates specifically, right? There is the Birkas HaShachar and the Karbonos, there is the Pesukei Zimra, there's the Shemanis blessings, and there's the Amida. The number 4, of course, is not coincidental, right? We've already seen so many times that the number 4 corresponds to the 4 letters of Hashem's name, Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey. The letter 4 corresponds to the 4 olamos, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. We saw that the number 4 corresponds to the levels of the soul, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chaya, Yechidah, which are really the 2 which are part of the Yud with its 2 points, actually corresponding to the Olamats, to the worlds of Atzilus and Ein Sof. So it's really like 4 which are 5. It's really 4 which are 5. By the way, it also corresponds to the 4 elements. 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air, going from low to high. Yeah. So in the actual prayer itself,
Does it have anything to do with the 4 Yirmiyahu also?
I'm not sure. It wouldn't seem so, because that would be too arbitrarily gender-wise, feminine, as opposed to both female and male. But possibly, I'm not 100% sure about that. But here the idea is that progressing through the stages of the prayer, one is actually progressing through this whole series of 4s. So that if the first lowest level of prayer is going to be karbonos, right? That's because karbonos are about involving oneself in things of this worldly nature. Firstly, that first part of prayer, that first rung of prayer, which has the Birkas HaShachar, are brachas in which we are thanking Hashem for all of the wonderful ways in which we derive benefit from this world. And then the brachas, the Birkas HaShachar, are followed by the karbonos, where we're talking about actually using the bounty that we have in this world in order to turn and direct it towards the service of Hashem, which is what the karbonos are all about. And therefore it corresponds to the world of Asiya, the physical world, the world of physicality, the plane of nefesh, the lowest, more physical animal side of soul, corresponding to the karbonos. It corresponds to the final letter Hey of Hashem's name, that final letter Hey, which is defining and delineating the space or the box, the place of this world. Therefore, I think I covered the different aspects. Also, in elements, it corresponds to earth, the earthliness, the physicality. When saying these brachas and being involved in the karbonos properly, with the proper intention, what we're actually doing is beginning the process of unification, of rectification. The bringing about of the unification between the lowest physical aspect of creation and the highest spiritual aspect of existence, which is in Hashem. That's the unification that we're effecting here by climbing a ladder of prayer, rung by rung. After the karbonos, you have the part of the prayer which is Pesukei Zimra. What's Pesukei Zimra? The Pesukei Zimra is prayers of praise, verses of praise, much of which has to do with King David HaMelech's Tehillim. That's Pesukei Zimra. So Pesukei Zimra, you're emitting air and praise for God. That's one level above karbonos, going into the realm of not nefesh but of ruach. Okay, corresponding to the letter Vav in Hashem's name, because now you're departing the physical world and you're moving towards the spiritual, starting to make a connection between the physical and spiritual, where that Vav is the connector, it is the conduit. So it's a connector between the physical and spiritual. It corresponds to the level of soul, which is ruach, because we're expending air in praise of Hashem. And it corresponds to the quality of water being physical on the one hand, but much more fluid and viscous. And water is really the source of life in the physical world. And that's what the ruach does. The ruach is connecting the higher levels of soul to the body in order to give it life. This would bring us, therefore, into the next part of the prayer, which is Psukei Zimra, okay, corresponding to the world of Yetzirah, because Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, Nasirah. That would be the world of Yetzirah. So that when you leave Karbonos and you start Psukei Zimra, you're going into the world of Yetzirah, into the letter Vav, into the realm of the part of Nefesh, which is Ruach, right, corresponding to the water. The next step up is Kriyat Shema and the blessings, right? Where there, it's less about praise. Of course, there is praise there, but it's about recognizing the sovereignty of God over all of creation, which is really what the Shema, which is central to this part of the prayer, is all about. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus L'Olam Vaed. It is proclaiming God's sovereignty and rulership over all of creation, and accepting that upon ourselves as well, the pinnacle of creation. We not only recognize God as creator, but we accept God's sovereignty over ourselves as well. That's the Shema. That would correspond, therefore, to the letter He in Hashem's name, which is the world of Bria, and corresponds to the level of soul, which is Neshama. Why? Because we are now conceptualizing the unity of God. We're not just recognizing a world of multiplicity, we're actually conceptualizing the unity of God. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. God is one. And we're starting to declare the Yichud, right? This idea of all of this multiplicity actually being in God, who itself is one. Everything exists with God. And therefore it corresponds to the plane of Neshama, which is intellect. It's conceptualizing the very high idea of the oneness of God, and it's organizing all of the multiplicity into the concept of that oneness. And it corresponds to the letter He, because what it's doing is it is actually putting everything in God. Okay? It's putting everything in God. And it would correspond to the element of fire. The element of fire. When a person says the Shema, we're told that he should be full of fervor, shaking when he says that Shema, full of energy and fervor. And that would correspond to the element of fire, where the element of fire actually does, on the one hand, unify everything by consuming its physical aspect and reuniting everything in the realm of energy. That's what fire does, right? And that's what we're talking about here in the Shema. We're talking about starting to really affect the unity, the recognition, the realization that everything is one. That's what fire does, right? Fire makes everything one by reducing, combusting the external physical aspect of the thing, releasing its internal energy, which is actually common to everything, and directing it in which direction? Upward. Okay? So that would correspond then to Shema. After Shema, you go into the highest realm of the prayer, which is Tefillah, the silent prayer. That will correspond to the world of Atzilus, the letter Yud in Hashem's name, which points both upward, but also provides for the flow downward, and would correspond to the element of air, right, where Shema is silent. It's takeoff. You're floating in air, like the quality of air. You're going into and upward into a much higher realm. And when a person therefore goes through these 4 levels of prayer, corresponding to all of the relevant aspects of the Hashem's name, the worlds, the levels of soul, and the elements, he's actually himself making this, affecting himself this yichud between the lowest physical realm and the highest spiritual realm. So that in Tefillah, he's already in the realm of Atzilus, which is pointing towards Ein Sof, and he's operating already on the plane above Neshama, which is Chaya and Yechidah, and he's tapping into a very high place. This is the yichud that he achieves. It's an amazing, amazing idea. In this way, he himself kind of becomes like a shushvin, the person who brings together the chosin and the kala under the chuppah. If the purpose of bringing the chosin and the kala together under the chuppah is ultimately so that they should be fruitful and multiply, what that means is there should issue forth from this union which he's affecting fruitfulness and bounty. And that's exactly what happens. From that point on, shefa flows through him, through his tefillah, through his yichud of the different oilamos, through his prayer, back down again. From Atzilus to Bria, and Bria to Yetzirah, and Yetzirah to Asiyah. And that's what's referred to here. Ushar tikunim habayim acharehem. After he reaches Atzilus in tefillah, he starts to come down. And the shar tikunim habayim acharehem are the parts of the prayer which are after the parts that he's delineated. Here in our text, it doesn't say what they are and how many are there. But there are 3, and that's why you said, seeing in the translation, there are a total of 7. And it's referring to basically the Uval Etzion, which has the Kedusha that Me'umad. That would be taking from Yetzirah, which is reached in the Amida, down into, from Etzilus, down into Bria. And then the next part of the prayer is Shir Shel Yom, and Ein Kelokenu, which is in the Siddur, towards the end of the prayer. That would be taking the Sheva back down from Bria to Yetzirah. And then the final part of the prayer is the Aleinu L'Shabeach, which is all about Malchut Shamayim. Aleinu Shabeach La'adon HaKol. And if you read through the Aleinu Shabeach, you see that it's all about Malchus. And what that means is it's bringing the Shefa down back to the world of Asiyah, corresponding to the sphere of Malchus, which is the point of Shefa from Keser down into this world through Malchus. So that actually what you're doing is you're like climbing a spiritual tree where there's fruit on the top. You're climbing first what is it called? You're climbing first the trunk of the tree. And then you get into the first tier of the large branches. And from the first tier of branches, you go up to the second higher tier of branches until you finally get to the highest part of the tree, and there's a fruit there. What do? You pluck it. But you don't throw it down. Right? What do? You take it down with you and climbing down, level by level by level, so that fruit is delivered in a proper way, which preserves what it's all about to the recipient. So everything having to do with the mitzvah of chosin and kala, therefore, is a reference to the yichud of the male and the female, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world, the upper spheres and the lower spheres, which is all about bringing down fruit. And not just one piece, but a multiplicity of pieces of fruit, right? Spiritual fruit, which is encapsulated pockets of divine sweetness, which have a pleasant appearance and effect on the world. That's what he's referring to here. That's Achnasas Kala L'Chuppah. The Amida, which is at the pinnacle of the prayer, corresponding to the letter Yud, where a person's feet are planted on the one hand on the earth, but his head is directed to Shemayim, like that letter Yud. Once he's able to tap into the levels of Neshama, which are Chai and Yechidah, and in the Oilamas, which are Atzilus and Bria, he brings that Shefa down. And he says here that Hakol Gemulas Chesed El Chosan V'Akala, all of this is for the purpose of doing the mitzvah of Gemulas Chesed, doing loving kindness, providing for the needs of the Chosan and the Kala, where now you understand Chosan and Kala is not just referring to an actual man and woman, but it's referring to it's referring to the spheros, it's referring to the olamas, it's referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself in the world. And that's, by the way, why before a mitzvah, according to the Kabbalistic teachings, we say L'shem Yichud Kudshe B'richu Shchinte. Before I do this mitzvah, I have in mind that it is in the name of, it's for the purpose of, it's with the intention of bringing about a yichud, a unification between Kudshe B'richu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shchinte, and the feminine aspect, which is the Shechina. That's the higher aspects, the higher olamos, and the lower. That would be Atzilus and Bria. Asiya. Or that would be, for example, that would be Keser and Malchus. It's all for the purpose of providing for the needs of the chassan and the kala in the different manifestations that we discussed. And this is the fakeach al tzorchem v'tikunei zivugam. This should be to oversee their needs and to properly bring about their zivug. This is probably also connected to the reason why, for example, it's certainly very desirable to bring a chassan and kala together in the chuppah when the kala is in a state of tahara, state of purity. If she's not, it's called a chuppahs nida. A chuppahs nida is a very unfortunate situation physically, but also spiritually. Chuppahs nida means that at the moment when you're bringing about the yichud through the male and the female, where the whole purpose is that there should be fruitness and multiplicity, that will not take place. Why? Because the kala is in nida. The malchus is in din. And since the kala is in nida, the malchus is in din, you're not going to be able to have, malchus is not going to be able to be a proper receptacle to receive the shefa and bring forth the fruitfulness and the multiplicity which should come about through, for example, Keser and all of the other spheros. And it's something to be avoided, therefore, chuppahs nida. If you can't avoid it, you can't do it. Every effort is made to avoid it, but if you can't do it, you can't do it. It doesn't mean that the couple can't get married. And they do. You're not going to change all of those plans for that. So the yichud of the chassan and kala have to take place another time. But clearly, ideally, there should be the first union of the chassan and kala when the kala, meaning the malchus, is not a nida, meaning she's not in din, but rather she should be a practical receptacle in order to actually enable this flow, yes, to be a flow of chesed and rachamim, of brocha and metikus, rather than chas v'shalom, a flow of admimus, redness or din, chas v'shalom. And that's probably one of the reasons why there's so much emphasis on preparing the kala. Achnosas kala. We don't say achnosas chosin. Achnosas kala. Yeah, the kala has to be prepared for all of this, and all of her needs are taken care of her, and any blemishes are removed, and she's clothed in beautiful white, which is not din, it's chesed. And she's brought underneath the chuppah. This is a very, very interesting thing. It's to prepare the kala so that she should be properly prepared to serve the role as that receptacle for the shefa. Very interesting. And there is this custom to have the kala encircle the chassan 7 times under the Rabbi has that custom, but. Not everyone has a custom. I don't believe that the Sephardim do that. Am I mistaken? Do you know?
No.
They don't. No. Yeah. But certain. Yeah, but the Ashkenazim do it, and some of the reasons some of the reasons for that is that there are kind of koichos, hamefridos, kind of divisive powers that exist between the chassan and the kala, and as the kala, and they correspond to the seven spheros of tuma, and as the kala is going around the chassan one time after another time after another time, it's bringing the malchus closer to the other spheros in order to break through these kind of occluding klipos, which separate the kala, which is the malchus, from the masculine spheros, which are from tiferes down, as we said, or actually from hesed down, and each circle around takes rid of one of the klipos in order to enable the malchus to get closer and properly receive from the chasen, which is the tiferes, which is really part of the 6 lower spheros from chesed down to yesod. Another explanation that comes to mind as we're learning this, which I had in mind before, is that the kala, which we said is from the word kalula, and therefore malchus, because she contains within her everything, is actually, by encircling 7 times, also kind of preparing herself to receive from the chasan, and therefore become kalula, to become inclusive of everything, the spheres that are being brought down to her through the chasan, where the chasan is tiferes. So the one explanation I said is about removing the klipos. The second one is the actual 7 times, which are preparing her each time in order to become kalula, to become prepare her to become filled with the shefa from the chasan, which is coming from all of the spheres above the malchus. Yeah. Okay, very good. Let's end here, and Bezrat Hashem will go on to the final one tomorrow. Bezrat Hashem.